Okay. Well, an official good afternoon to all of you ending your day. It's noontime over here on the West Coast, but I'm so thankful you all are spending a little bit of your pre-Halloween Friday afternoon with us. My name is Caitlin Rhodes, and I work for DreamBox Learning as a professional development specialist. So I work to support teachers with implementing DreamBox, specifically providing PD and resources, things like that. I previously taught here in San Diego a 3rd through 5th grade math class. And I actually grew up in North Carolina and taught 4th grade math and science for several years as well. So I'm kind of in that upper elementary range. I am licensed as a K through 6th math specialist. It's really nice that we have a pretty big mix here, all the way from my special ed 2nd grade, K to 8 intervention, and my algebra. Emily's going to hold it down with our algebra support here too. So very nice. And we have Nicolette joining us as well. Welcome in. Feel free in the chat box, let us know where you're from, what you teach, if you're familiar with DreamBox. Specifically for this session, this is kind of a more focused session into using DreamBox really strategically in a virtual environment. So again, if you're not super familiar with DreamBox, I'm going to touch on a couple things, but just know that there's other resources we can support you with if you are brand new and need more supporting resources around that. We'll try to keep our content so that way there's time left at the end for open-ended questions as well. So if you have other questions beyond the content that we cover, feel free just to ask then or ask in the chat. I also have Amy on the line who is from DreamBox, so she can help answer any chat questions as well. And is also just listening in. So thanks for being here, Amy. All right, so specifically our topic is using DreamBox for creating a rigorous learning experience. So what I have heard in all of my, kind of talks with teachers and this shift to remote learning has been really hard, particularly with math instruction, because a lot of those experiences we may be providing in our classroom are not easily able to be replicated in an online forum. And I'm seeing a lot of extra work being done on your end, teacher's end, in terms of creating things to really make math engaging and have these really great online tools to use. And if your curriculum doesn't really support being able to do those lessons in an online format, again, you might be working overtime. So this is specifically focused on how do I use a DreamBox lesson to create this rigorous learning experience in the form of, we do some guided exploration in the form of actually using a DreamBox lesson as our mini lesson, like our instructional tool, we use a DreamBox lesson. And then we can follow up with that mini lesson or guided exploration with independent practice. So if students, again, we work on something together, we want them to be able to follow up and apply it themselves. And then the third, we'll add in as an optional way to hold students accountable, add in reflection, being able to apply their thinking. We'll just kind of talk about some ways you can add on a kind of third layer to DreamBox. So all of these part 1, part 2, part 3 can actually be done in isolation. You could just use a lesson together and just play it together, and that be how you utilize DreamBox. You could just use the independent practice. So just know that, I'm going to kind of put them all together, but just know that you could, do them in isolation as well. Perfect. Thanks, Nicolette. Is also 2nd grade. Very nice. So I want to make sure, first off, that we're all on the same page with what makes, what is rigor and what makes a rigorous lesson. So when it comes to teaching math, no matter which grade level we teach or support and, the level of students, it's super important that we engage with all 3 of those phases of rigor, that students really understand what they're doing. They have that conceptual level understanding. They know how things work, so that way they can make connections. They can say, oh, I learned this previously, this is how this adds on. I'm sure Emily up in algebra, can really attest to that importance, that by the time they get to her, they have to have that solid understanding of everything. Otherwise, that, they're trying to remember too much, and they often forget, this goes with that, and this steps or algorithm is tied to this. So really making sure that conceptual understanding piece is the most important. That often happens through that exploration, having conversation about the math. Again, a little bit more exploring, and that's kind of where we'll focus in today. But then also, we know we need to build those procedural skills that students should be able to do things quickly, efficiently, fluently, right, and flexibly. So we want students to not only understand what they're doing, but again, myself in my range, seeing students even go from 3rd to 5th grade, know how important it is. We need to move students towards like kind of finding specific strategies to use, right? So with that, we're going to move students through conceptual understanding, procedural skills and fluency, and then we ultimately want them to be able to apply their thinking, okay, and to be able to look at an unfamiliar situation and say, oh, I have enough content and skills to be able to tackle that concept. All right. Okay, welcome in. If you're just joining us, feel free, find that chat box, say hello, let us know where you're from, what you teach, and if you've ever used DreamBox before. That's helpful information for us. We're glad you're here. So specifically, right, how DreamBox can support these phases of rigor, how DreamBox does support these phases of rigor, I should say. DreamBox always starts students at the conceptual level when they first initially get a skill. So when students are learning a concept for the very first time, they're exposed to a lesson that allows them to explore. They're kind of making sense of things for themselves. They are looking, for example, that I have here with multiplication, these open-endedness of being able to just understand what is an array, how does it work, how do we add rows and columns, and how do, how just does that connect to multiplication? From there, we know we want students to be able to find structure, look for relationships. We're kind of change the array to force them to notice things. And then from there, we know that again, that fluency, we want them to be able to use strategies that are flexible but efficient in that quick and flexible manner. So just so you can see kind of a sequence of DreamBox lessons, these are lessons from 3rd to 4th grade, through, again, multiple lessons in an extended period of time. But I just want you to see a little bit of this progression through these phases of rigor. So that way you can kind of watch how the tool changes and how we actually adapt the lesson to support students understanding and growing as they work from conceptual to fluency. All right, so as I mentioned, first kind of open-ended exploration, but then we start changing the tool. We force students to notice things, to notice that area can be decomposed, that those, start to develop this sense of distributive property. And these are 3rd grade level lessons at first. Then we want to start, kind of, again, looking for things with those larger numbers. So giving students units of tens to build their arrays now, with the ultimate goal that they can use an area model or this array fluently. That's kind of the 4th grade level expectation. And then 5th grade, they would go on to that standard algorithm, right? So pushing them forward when they're ready. DreamBox actually analyzes how students are doing in the lessons, how they use those tools, how they're interacting. And when students are ready for that next phase of rigor, the next lesson they're presented with is going to move them forward. Ultimately, that procedural fluency is when we say a student is fully proficient. Again, they can do things quickly and efficiently and accurately with every skill, okay? So for those of you that are new to DreamBox, your most important job is just supporting what we call the DreamBox adaptive engine in its natural state. So DreamBox works to find exactly which skills students need in all of our content areas, and then works to support them through those phases of rigor with these learning progressions. So specifically within multiplication and division, DreamBox is going to find where students are, and it's going to work to grow and kind of think about fill in those gaps in learning, or unfinished learning as we like to call it. So DreamBox is going to find that unfinished learning, it's going to fill it in for students to get them up to speed, and automatically progresses them through that content. So you'll see that you don't ever have to assign work for students in DreamBox. You don't ever have to choose content for them to do. What we're going to look in today for our mini lesson involves that, of being able to pick specific lessons. But if, again, you're brand new, I want you to know that most importantly is supporting DreamBox in the really great work that it does naturally. Okay, that happens with 5 lessons each week. each lesson taking on average 5 to 15 minutes, okay, for students to complete. So if you're really saying, hey, DreamBox sounds pretty cool, I want to designate, some time for students to work on it, 15 to 20 minutes each day, one lesson each day, or, on average, 60 minutes a week total. Whatever works for you, using DreamBox and really leaning on it, because it does all this really amazing differentiation for you. It's going to support all students with exactly which skills that they need, and again, automatically progresses them forward when they're ready for that next concept. Okay, so they kind of go through this initial phase. I see Jen's got a question about kind of like how much in terms of kind of DreamBox getting to know students and going through this adaptive process. Definitely, the first several weeks of students playing with 5 lessons each week. But what's great is DreamBox actually adapts after every lesson that students do. So there's not a specific test that students take. They initially start at their grade level content, and then DreamBox either works them back or forward from there based on what it uncovers about what they understand. Okay. Absolutely. And so you'll see on the student side, a little visual for you that I mentioned that after every lesson that students do, see when it's complete, it'll bring them back to their homepage. And it does this like recalculating. Think about like your GPS, where it's like, okay, watch now. Lesson's complete. It's going to recalculate and recalibrate to what students need next on their lesson chooser page. So again, this all happens naturally. You don't have to support with choosing assignments or things like that. We're going to look at this as a specific tool. But again, if you're just getting started, just have your kids go play DreamBox and have them do 5 lessons each week. Okay. Any big questions on that, especially since I know some of you are new, before we get into our official mini lesson for today? Hi, Tracy.
Hi there. Should we?
Yeah, either one. You can come off mute or come in. It's a small group, so feel free to just take yourself off mute if you have a question.
Okay, so I was wondering, we did a pilot last spring with our students, and now this year we have a paid subscription. And I was wondering, just in terms of it looks like everything that the students who were here in district last year did the previous year, it still is showing up, which was really great. And I was just wondering, is there anything that we need to do to reset a student's progress, or is that capability sometimes needed for certain students that I'm just saying hypothetically that maybe they got help and they are moving forward a little too quickly?
Yeah, great question. So student progress is always saved and transfers over year to year. So if students used in the spring, then their progress, they can just pick up right off where they left off from the spring. Again, it's going to keep moving them forward in content. If you ever find that a student, maybe I've heard this a lot about maybe parents helped too much in the spring while students were all at home. And, if you ever hear that, a student's level can be reset. Just reach out to our support team at support@dreambox.com with those specific students that you might have concerns about, and they can reset that for you. Again, in general, we just say, let them keep going, let them keep working. It's only if you find in that rare case that, a student maybe needs to be reset, that, again, maybe they got too much help last spring, things like that. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. And a question from Jen is, what if a student is struggling to complete a lesson? Will it keep repeating the same information? So DreamBox will give students a few opportunities on a lesson, but it's actually going to adapt after the students complete the lesson. So if a student finishes a lesson, but actually wasn't understanding what they were doing, DreamBox takes in that information to try to give them a second try, but it makes some kind of minor tweaks to the lesson itself. And then if a student is unsuccessful repeatedly, that's when you'll actually get tagged in your DreamBox dashboard as a notification where it says the student may need attention. And then from there is when DreamBox will, again, kind of adapt backwards to say, okay, we weren't ready for that skill. Let's open back a foundational level lesson and try that level. So initially, as students are working, they kind of go through that process where even if they're struggling, again, it's good information for DreamBox. It's giving DreamBox data about what the student doesn't understand to be able to figure out exactly what they need to support them instead. So kind of a best practice if, again, students have never played on DreamBox before, that those initial few weeks take some growth mindset as they're working through skills, and DreamBox is getting to know them and figuring out that exact, we like to think about as like their optimal learning zone. Did I answer that question, Jen? Perfect. Okay. All right. Again, any other questions like that, feel free to put them in the chat. I appreciate Amy, you helping out with that. Thank you. So as I mentioned, we are going to look at how we can actually use a DreamBox lesson as our instructional content. DreamBox works really, really well in an independent setting. Students can just go on and they play. DreamBox adapts for them. It provides them feedback. It provides them tools like hints and all these great digital manipulatives. So you really don't have to do a lot, again, in terms of supporting that natural adaptive state that DreamBox works. Again, our focus for here is how you can also utilize the lessons as this instructional support to actually teach with and provide students with, again, that rigorous learning experience in this remote learning setting. So I'm glad I have a gentleman put you on the spot, but I haven't had anybody yet that actually taught third grade. We are going to, for our mini lesson that I'm going to model today, we're going to focus on a third grade skill of exploring area. So third grade is the very first time that students officially form this understanding of area, at least by Common Core standards. So if you don't teach third grade, like I know many of you don't, just read through real quick the standards that this lesson covers, just to make sure you're on the same page with what the objective is. All right. So see lots of things about these unit squares, about tiling, making connections to area being additive. There are lots of standards at this third grade level that develop this understanding of area and perimeter as well. So I just kind of pulled a couple of keywords that, again, if you're not familiar with this content, this is what you'll see in the DreamBox lesson we're going to do together. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned, the first step is that good solid, kind of when we think about a mini lesson or providing students an opportunity to learn the concepts for themselves. So when I taught this skill to my third graders back in class, it was always a really fun one because there's so many hands-on, things to do with area. So many manipulatives to use, a lot of Cheez-It math I've seen from third grade teachers, square tiles, Legos, all kinds of projects that can be done with really engaging with area. So as I mentioned, being able to replicate these things in the classroom can often be, in an online setting is often difficult, okay? Being able to find the tools or have to create the tools, like that can take a lot of work to really support students with the same sort of experience that was pretty easy to do by giving them, some kind of tools to play with and explore. So we're going to look at how DreamBox addresses this skill. And again, how we can use this as our lesson for the day. This is, again, going to be a third grade, a measurement lesson on area and perimeter. This is where I'm going to ask you to put on we're going to do a little time hop back to third grade. Okay, I'm going to ask you to pretend to be a third grade student to participate with me in the lesson as I model it from the teacher's perspective. Okay, so I'm going to actually engage with you all as if this were my mini lesson for the day, and I'm going to have us kind of talk through the lesson together. I'm going to ask you to participate. So whether you want to participate in the chat or off mute is totally up to you, but I'm going to ask you guys to kind of pretend to be 9 years old again. Can we do that? All right. I know Jen's got this. She'll keep us in check with what's realistic for our third grade. Perfect. All right, and I know Emily's gonna really wow us with her understanding. She's the algebra 1, so all this thinking about way back in third grade, this is like when a lot of her concepts of just like, again, that distributive property stuff really starts to happen. Not particularly in this lesson, but a lot of our DreamBox lessons really hit that distributive property hard in third and fourth grade. All right. So as I mentioned, we are going to, I'm going to actually show you how I would get to this lesson first, and then I'll model this again afterwards after the lesson. So essentially in your DreamBox dashboard, and if I know some of you were more like an interventionist or instructional support, you might have a different way of getting to this. So there's kind of a few options. So if you are a classroom teacher, you have this home tab. And you might have a home tab if you're interventionist as well, but if you don't see one, don't panic. So that home tab at the very bottom, I'll come back to a couple of things on here, but at the very bottom is our assignment section. Okay, and again, you don't ever have to create that assignment. It's an option, it's a supplement to the DreamBox lessons that DreamBox recommends for students. But again, we're going to use it as our tool here. So if I go to add an assignment, what is super cool when I look to search for a skill that I want to assign to students. And I'm specifically, again, looking for third grade measurement and area and perimeter. So if I were to go to add this assignment to students, I have some additional steps and we'll do that next. But actually what happens is you're given a preview of each lesson and each level lesson. So as I mentioned, DreamBox supports students through those phases of rigor to, again, progress them forward in their thinking and to really get them to that level of understanding that we want to see from students. Okay, so with these, again, they're given to you as a preview, so you can view the assignment before you give it to students. But as our pro tip here, you can, again, engage with these lessons with students via Zoom, Google Meet, all this kind of good stuff. So I'm going to use this just started lesson. That's going to be our most conceptual level, kind of that entry level where it allows students to explore. All right. Make sure everyone has talking power if you'd like to participate. Okay, so here's where we're going back to third grade. We're going to be nine years old again for a moment. All right, boys and girls, I never said that to my class actually. All right, class. So for today's math lesson, we're actually going to work on a DreamBox lesson together. So before we even go over directions or anything like that, I have my DreamBox lesson pulled up here and I want you just to take a look and I want you to tell me what do you notice on our screen with this DreamBox lesson, anything that you notice. And again, for our purposes, feel free in the chat, make sure it says panelist and attendee so everybody can see, or you're welcome to come off mute. What do we notice? A blank box, a rectangle? I see 2 rectangles. Ooh, a vertical rectangle. What else? Anything else we notice? Directions, some words. I see a little yellow swivel arrow. What does that do? The number 33. Total unit squares. Okay. All right. Feel free to put any other noticings in the chat. Let's go ahead and read the directions together. And then I want you thinking about what do you want to try? What should we do based on the directions? The directions say, click to place tiles to measure the total number of unit squares it takes to fill the shape. Click to place tiles to measure the total number of unit squares it takes to fill the shape. Anybody have a thought on what they want to try based on what we noticed and what our directions say? What do you want me to try?
Click in
should
the
we do
middle
here?
of the rectangle.
Oh, the middle of rectangle, this rectangle?
No, the other one, the one in the center.
Okay. Did anybody notice something that happened when I clicked though?
No, yeah.
Anybody noticing when I'm clicking?
Little small box, making more.
Uh-huh. Okay. All right. So good job. We picked up on our verb was to click. So clicking, placing tiles. Oh, I see Jen sees that the number is going down. This number that we have remaining is going down. So now that I have a few squares, and are we all in agreement we should be putting these in this middle rectangle? Yeah. Okay. So I want to stop in the chat. Now that I've put a few squares, and who can remind me how many squares did we have before I placed those 3?
33.
33. Okay, so if I'm given 33, I want everyone to give me an estimate. How many unit squares do you think it will take to fill that rectangle? Do you think we'll need all 33? Do you think that's too much? I see Tracy's got 24. Give me an estimate. What do you estimate? How many squares do you think it's going to take to fill that rectangle? Right, 30, 25, 24. So we're thinking that we're going to have enough to fill our rectangle. Okay, so I'm going to click to fill my rectangle. Okay, my number is going down. All right, my rectangle is full. Now, who can tell me how many square units, how many of these square tiles did it take to fill my rectangle? How did you guys know so fast? Did you count them individually? Ooh, I'm seeing some different strategies. And I know some of you can't, again, if you want to make sure everybody can see it, if you change your chat to panelists and attendees, but I'm seeing some different things. So I see Jen says, oh, wait, we had 33 to start with. There are 3 remaining. That tells me there should be 30 that are on that rectangle. I'm seeing Tracy is letting me know 5 times 6. And Carolyn's saying 5 in a row. So I see some equal groups of 5, right? So I'm seeing that I have 30 unit squares for this shape. Very nice. Okay, our question says, could you have found the number of unit squares that cover the shape by placing fewer tiles? So I want everybody just to reflect on that question for a second. Could you have found the shape using fewer, or could you have found the total number using fewer tiles? Hold that thought, think on that. I'm going to go to our next and watch what's going to happen. It says, what if we change the shape just a bit? What happened? Do you notice now? We've got 2 almost kind of parts of rectangles now. So our rectangles change. Yeah, it went to the left. It took off some of the bigger one. I now have some space that I see. How would we find the number of total square units it would take to fill this shape? Looks to be about the same number of tiles. Emily, could we do something to prove that?
Yeah, we can take away the bottom right, and we can literally just like put all those in the other, yep, like that.
All right, so I can see, these 6 tiles that seem to have been kind of left out when we shifted our shape, they fit exactly into that missing space. So what does that tell me about how many unit squares it'll take to fill this shape?
It's gonna wind up being the same.
It's gonna be the same. Nice finding. Okay, very nice. Okay, did we notice any similarities between your first and second shape? I noticed that they have the same number of square units or square tiles it takes to make that whole shape. Okay, now, what do you notice about this rectangle and the number of tiles that we have? Ooh, it's longer and there's only 16 tiles. So if I were to estimate, do we think we're going to have enough to fill this rectangle? No. Okay, so does anybody have a way they think we could find the total number of tiles without having enough to fill the rectangle? What could we do here? Ooh, length and width, rows, top, bottom, sides, half. Ooh, do you think it would fit in half? I like that strategy, Tracy. Don't know that I have quite enough for half, but could I use that information to maybe help me figure out the total number of unit squares? I see I can maybe fit one more row of 4. So that might tell me how much half of the rectangle was. I could use that information. I'm seeing us say we could make rows. How many rows could I make? I see 5 rows. Okay, I know you all learned about rows and columns in 2nd grade with arrays. Okay, now if I have my rows and columns, could someone write me an expression that would represent how I'd find the total number of tiles with these rows and columns that I made for you all? Ooh, I see 5 times 8. 8 times 5. Ooh, are those the same? How are those different? Can anyone write me a repeated addition sentence that would match this equation or match this rectangle? Right? So if I know there's 8 groups of 5, okay. So you guys are being fantastic sports. Thank you. Gold stars for everybody on their 3rd grade math lesson for today. Okay. So you can see, I mean, you could add so much into this with actually, you know, asking questions. So much of it is coming from you guys. Again, I have some prompting questions based on the directions that are on the screen that I can use and follow. But a lot of it is just from this, you know, what do students see? What do they want to try? What strategies do they have? You guys are coming up with different things and I could take time and highlight those, right? Maybe I write down Jen's repeated addition equation and Emily's multiplication. I say, how are these connected? Right? If I haven't even gone into multiplication yet, it's surfacing that for me as an instructional moment, I can make those connections for students. Okay. And then watch what happens if I go on to the next one now even. So now we're given, we're still limited to our squares, our square units. We've done this where we've changed our shape to this rectilinear shape. And now I'm asking students, okay, make those connections for me. What did we notice before about the area when we decompose this into 2 different rectangles? The area is the same. How did we know that, right? Opens itself for all kinds of those conversations. So DreamBox is supporting, even in this particular lesson is supporting, you can kind of see how it's moving through those phases of rigor, right? That it's like, oh, we give you enough to explore, but we're going to take some away to force you to notice. You know, I did that activity with a poster board and sticky notes, and I gave them only like 5. And I said, how many sticky notes does it take to cover this paper? You know, you limit them to force them to find things. And then we're doing this, you know, idea of, hey, what happens if we change the shape? That's not necessarily the main idea of this lesson, but it's starting to get them thinking about that, where they're going to be prompted to do it even further with this idea of area. Okay, so lots of things, you know, again, you can do with that lesson in particular. Notice my questions that I asked were all just very kind of open-ended. You can use the same 4 questions to really support, you know, this. I recommend playing it first yourself just to have an idea of what you want to cover, but you can say, what do you notice? What do you wonder? What do you want to try? And then always follow up with like, why? Why do you think that? Tell me more. And have students really lead the conversation. You're the one driving the mouse, unless you want to go there and do remote control with, if you use Zoom and have them, you know, be in control of the mouse. But in general, you're kind of letting them guide the exploration based on what they want to try, what they're noticing. Again, you can annotate on top of things to really mark things up if you want to. But it just allows you to, again, have that collaboration time that we don't have as much right now. And be able to have the conversation and explain their thinking. Okay. So then from there, we would want students, just like we would, within a class period, we say, okay, we've done something together. I want you to follow up. I want you to be able to do this lesson, yourself and see if you can make those connections as well. So with that, we would want to get in there to create an assignment for students. So that way they could, in their independent time for the afternoon, get my dashboard pulled back up, they could actually go and, and give it a try themselves. So it's great because, again, students could still use their own strategies, things that they were, noticed and wondering there, but they're kind of thinking about the other things that students pointed out when doing it together. So that was back to, again, at the bottom of my screen, my home screen, these are the directions again. And if you are, again, an instructional support, you can go to reports. And if you look at a specific teacher and select a classroom, you can go to the assignment history and you can create, you can look at assignments from there as well. If you don't have that home tab. The easiest way is the home tab. And then to that assignment section. No problem. Thank you, Tracy. Thanks for being here. Have a great rest of your Friday. And Tracy, let me make sure you have the resource as well, just in case it gets, I'll put the link in the chat real quick. There you go. Make sure you guys can open that. That's just the steps that I'm taking here. So it'll be shared with the recording of this session, but just in case that's helpful to share with teachers as a resource.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Yes.
So then back to, this was the steps I did before as well. Once I select the topic, and I suggest going by the DreamBox curriculum. You can always search by your state standards, or if you align to a particular print program, you can align that way as well. With the DreamBox curriculum, it's going to be the most true to the skill that you want. They're a little more broken down, whereas sometimes if you select like one of your Common Core standards, there's actually like 3 or 4 skills built in there. So I recommend going that DreamBox units, and that's how I'm going to model, but that is up to you. So I selected the measurement in area and perimeter. And again, reminder, this is where I got the lesson from with those preview lesson links. I could have done any of these levels, okay, that I wanted to.
And operators to build an expression.
He's playing one.
Find 3
So you could use those. Again, those represent those 3 phases of rigor. But now these students checked underneath here would, if I go to click add assignment at the bottom, are going to receive this lesson on their DreamBox page as an assignment. Okay, so on their DreamBox page, they would receive the particular lesson you want them to work on. It's going to have this blue icon, and students can know, okay, for their independent work time, that they could go in and use this particular, do that particular lesson. And what's nice is if the students had any progress already, okay, if they had any, like they'd done some work with area and perimeter already in DreamBox, this is really cool because DreamBox actually will group them based on where they were with that skill. And it's going to differentiate even the assignment that you give them. So all of these students that are in this first category, they haven't started this skill yet in DreamBox, so they need that entry level, that really conceptual, right? The one that we just did. Whereas these 6 students, they had progress already. You could see the percentages. Jill's almost 74% of the way there. So what's cool is DreamBox actually just picks up on their progress that they had already made. Notice Bryant and Kim here are in this proficient group. They've already been marked proficient with this skill. They've already passed the lesson, if you want to think of it that way. So you could give it to them. Again, if this is a whole class assignment and you want to make sure that students are all experiencing kind of the same thing, just note that you have to check this because DreamBox doesn't default to give them the lesson if they were already proficient with it. So just heads up on that one. If you want to make sure all students have it, make sure they're all selected. But with this, you could assign it just to a small group. Okay, you could do this as a small group lesson and just assign it to that small group of students. If you wanted to whole class, just make sure they're all selected. And again, then it will show up on the student's page. You just need to click add assignment and it'll show up on the student's page, again, with this blue icon. And on that resource that I put in the chat that you'll get with the recording, there is the part here when you go to add the assignment, there's a resource that has the icons. So if you need a visual to give to students to say like, hey, during independent work time today, when you go to DreamBox, make sure to do this one with this icon. You can use that as a tool there. Okay, be able to kind of share expectations with students, especially there's different, make sure to look for those of you that are in K2, they have a different view than students that are in 3.5 or 6.8, kind of the upper grades. So just feel free to differentiate those. And then there's also like just a document. You could just take the images if you want to add it to like your LMS or things like that. Okay. And I forgot to mention, so let me go back for just a second. I do recommend using a short-term assignment for this purpose. The short-term can be done within one like 30-minute time frame. It's great for, okay, we did the lesson together this morning, now go complete it this afternoon. They could absolutely do it. It's just going to be 1 or 2 lessons. Each lesson, again, 5 to 15 minutes. So, you know, thinking about, you know, a 30-minute time frame, they should be able to complete the assignment in DreamBox. Any questions on creating the assignment? Based on what you've seen, I hear some of you poking around in there, which is cool. So hopefully you find something, look for something that, you know, is upcoming that you could use to support. Again, I always recommend playing that just started level lesson together. That's going to be the most that allows for that exploration. At times, if you use the review lesson, that's going to be that fluency, right? That quick practice. So not necessarily the best for conversation if you want to think about it that way. Okay, so then from there, you want to be able to monitor their progress, right? We want to be able to say, all right, if I gave this assignment to students, how are they doing with it? How did they pass it? You know, do they even do it? So our next step is to monitor that progress. So there are 2 different ways you can get to what we call the assignment history. And one is on the home tab, just right next to where you went to add the assignment. Pull that up. There's a section here that says view assignment history. It's kind of small. That's probably the easiest way to get there. But again, you can also go to the reports tab. No, sorry. And then you can look at the assignment history that will show up for your class. Okay, so 2 different ways you can get to that, the assignment kind of progress page. And so with that, it will keep all of your assignments that you have. But it's great because it isolates the very particular lesson you wanted to kind of monitor for students. Try to reload my page. But essentially with the short-term assignment, show you this one loading. You'll get whether students have completed the assignment or not. You'll get how long they spent on it. Notice students will take different amounts of time on the lesson just based on how they're working. Again, DreamBox adapts to how they're doing even in the lesson. So if a student's missing a bunch of questions in a row, you know, it's going to kind of take them back even within that lesson. Or if a student's getting them, you know, right really quickly, maybe a student didn't have to place all those tiles initially on the rectangle. Maybe they knew it already. They could enter in the answer and it's going to move them on quicker. So don't get too concerned if you see that, you know, different amounts of time spent. And then these green and gray check marks will designate how students are doing with those 2 lessons. Some students might only need 1 opportunity to prove that they were proficient. Like I see Laura here only has 1 green check mark. And then, you know, some students have 2. So that to me means Laura did it really quickly, efficiently, and they kind of moved her on after just 1. Whereas some students actually needed to do it again to get an extra practice, if you want to think about it that way. And then some students, you know, might have not demonstrated understanding the first time and then demonstrated understanding the second time. So with the assignment history, this is where you can actually click and sort to be able to see, have students completed it? How did they do? And then under this more category, will actually show you the exact lesson, the exact level of lesson that the students saw. The numbers might be slightly different than what they actually saw, but it's going to be the same exact level. So again, if we're looking at that differentiated, some students got a review lesson, some students got the just started lesson. You'll be able to see those if you are curious at more detail, which ones they actually did. Any questions on that? Guys good there? Okay. So the final thing, this one is optional, but I always like to give them a way to kind of follow up on their thinking, whether it's just in your next math class, you add a question and have students talk about it as a way to review, reflect, or it's a great opportunity to integrate some technology with students to practice that voice explanation, like you actually being able to talk their way through. So this is an example of question. I had the, my students know that I love the Minions. So I had a bunch of little stuffed Minions, and our Minions were always like making errors on their math, and they were always doing math problems that we got to analyze. So here I have Goob, who's one of our DreamBox mascots, but Goob's working on this area question in DreamBox. I pose it to my students of how could he find the total number of unit squares without enough squares to cover this shape? I added in a piece, use at least 2 of the terms when you explain. Rows, columns, unit square, multiply, decompose. So again, whether I share my screen and students do this again live in a Zoom meeting the next day, or if I'm using Flipgrid, Seesaw, those type things that students are engaging with each other on, it's a great way for them to all follow up on the same content that they did. Right? They all did a similar type lesson, so they can all kind of talk and share their thinking on it. Again, I like that they're practicing, especially those 2 platforms they use the voice recording. They can actually hear themselves talking it out because you don't get to watch them in particular what they do on DreamBox. So it gives them a chance to share what they were thinking, gives you some more evidence of what they're understanding, allows them to talk it out, practice vocabulary. Or if you give them something that's brand new, maybe it wasn't, an exact question from the DreamBox lesson. Maybe it's something and totally unfamiliar. That's that application of learning. Can students take what they did before and, apply it to something that's new and unfamiliar? So yeah, just as an option there. I created that, Jen, but I can totally share that with you. I actually made it, I think, even in Seesaw. I'll pull that up. And again, I think I actually did it with both. I did it with Seesaw and Flipgrid in case anybody wanted it. So if you're curious, since I know you do teach 3rd grade, then I can share that with you too. But that's it. Like I said, that's kind of optional there from that reflection piece, but it just allows, yeah, I did make it. Let me pull that up. So for example, in Seesaw, it's just, I did the screenshot that I added that students, I like in Seesaw, they can add on, they can annotate. So they could draw on the screen. They could show their equation, their expression. They could show how they're moving the tiles. And so students would just go in and add their response. I'll be me. And what's cool is, again, they can voice record, as they're drawing. They could just write on top of things, as they're working. So all kinds of cool stuff that, again, you could add. And then students can actually look at each other's. They could listen to each other's. They can comment on each other's. That little bit of collaboration piece that allows them to still share their thinking. Okay. All right, so that's it for me, official, kind of questions, anything regarding what I shared here, or just DreamBox questions in general. Again, make sure that you have this, can download this from Google. Hopefully that came through. Again, it will be with the webinar recording. You'll get an email follow-up with the recording and the resource, but it just has those steps. Again, if you're looking to support or share it with others, you can, thanks Amy, you can, follow those steps there. right. Thank you guys. Thank you for participating. You were wonderful in that sense. I know it's not hard being the, back to being the student, but I appreciate that. So appreciate all your participation. Awesome. Thanks for all your help, Amy. Happy Friday, everyone. Any other general questions? Just about DreamBox in general, those of you that were new? Awesome. Okay. So particular, Emily, you can even use, hopefully you found some of that stuff in the algebra content when looking at those assignments, either the algebra content or really heavily in those expressions and equations categories are great ways if you're really looking to target that specific set of skills for your students as well.
Yeah, I definitely saw that's going to be helpful.
Yeah. So, and what's a little side note actually for you with that, I would, so I mentioned doing the short-term assignments for this purpose, but if you're looking to kind of leave it more open-ended, you can actually, the long-term assignment will keep lessons on that student's page until they are proficient. So it works a little differently in that it's like kind of this like, oh, nope, I'm really looking to give you support with that. And what's kind of cool is if you do the long-term assignment, you could even do like a 5-week assignment on just all of you could do algebra and you could, you have to pick one of the categories, but then you can do all lesson groups in this category. And it'll make sure students are proficient with all 3 of these skills. So if you're looking like, oh, like they maybe need some review with some 8th grade expressions and equations, or maybe functions, you could actually go grade 8 expressions and equations and then do all lesson groups in this category. And DreamBox will keep lessons on their page until the 5 weeks are up or until they're proficient with every single one of these skills.
Oh, okay.
So that's usually a good way if you're like looking to kind of target a whole set of skills. That could be a good way to go about it too, just as a recommendation.
Oh yeah, that's even more helpful. Thank you.
Because that way you don't have to go in and make an assignment every day as well. Those kind of daily assignments are great. Again, as a follow-up to something specific that you're doing. But if you're also looking to support just like independent work with a targeted, skill, just that way you can kind of set it and forget it in terms of, I would still check on it, but you don't have to go in and be recreating assignments all the time. You know that students have it.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. If no other questions, happy Halloween. Who's over at Halloween? I have my pumpkin pie shirt on. Happy Friday. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And thanks so much for spending some time with us. Thank you. You too.